Okay, we are going to get things kicked off. So please grab your coffee, your water, your Sprites, whatever your drink of choice is, and grab a seat. I'm very excited to introduce the next part of our morning. It's a VC panel led by Debbie Levy from our Startup BD team. It's the team that I was talking about earlier this morning. So I guess I'll let you kick things off.
Great. So I'm part of the venture capital facing team here at AWS, and here with me are a lot of the great folks that we work with. I'll let them each introduce themselves. Why don't we start with you, Courtney?
Okay, there we go. Hi, I'm Courtney Robinson. I am a partner at Advanced Venture Partners, which is a New York and San Francisco-based firm. We have a $250 million fund, and I lead our consumer investing.
Hi, everyone. Charles Birnbaum, a partner at Bessemer Venture Partners. I'm based here in New York. We're a global fund investing currently out of a $1.6 billion fund, but we have about $4 billion under management. An early stage fund that continues to invest along the life cycle of business. Dustin, who is just up here, Betterment is a good example of one of our portfolio companies where we started with a couple $1 million check, but we kind of remain the largest shareholder today. I focus on fintech, financial services more broadly, and do some consumer investing as well.
I'm Zack Shildhorn. I'm a partner at Lux Capital. We're a venture firm here in New York and Silicon Valley that focuses only on futuristic science and technology companies. So everything from surgical robotics to 3D printing, space communications, drone racing. If it sounds like science fiction, we're probably invested. We're currently investing in a $400 million fund, and I focus a lot on the intersection of the digital and physical worlds.
Hi, my name's Adam Rothenberg. I have a fund called BoxGroup. We're an early stage fund, try to invest at the pre-seed or the seed, so probably a little bit earlier than the rest of the panel, ideally following up through 3 or 4 rounds of capital after that. We're total generalists, so we invest in everything from social consumer to enterprise, and it's a team of 4. We're all based out in New York.
Great, thanks everyone. So looking at how VC spending is tracking in 2017, it's looking to be the highest in over a decade, but lots of the money is going to some of the biggest deals. So what advice do you all have for early stage startup founders that are out there trying to raise their first rounds?
I'll jump in. So I've seen that data as well, but the anecdotal based on experience actually hasn't felt like that. I mean, we're certainly seeing huge mega rounds go into late stage companies and sort of consolidation into the winners. But at the early stage, I'm not seeing a tremendous slowdown. I'm seeing what feels like more smart people that are starting companies than ever. A continuation of sort of like the zeitgeist of like the startup nation, people attacking really interesting things, and a ton of capital that's supporting those early ideas. In a way, everyone can be an angel investor, and it takes $1 million to start a company, and we're seeing people raise that $1 million relatively easily at pretty high prices. So curious if you guys are seeing the same thing, but anecdotally, we're seeing a ton of capital at the really early stage.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I think over the past few years, we've seen like a bifurcation of, at the very early stages, there's a tremendous amount of capital spawning new ideas and getting people off the ground, which is phenomenal for larger funds. We have a lot to see and pick amongst, but it remains really competitive even at our stages, where the companies that have some semblance of traction going after large markets are raising at very, very high valuations still. There's a lot in between. So if you get off the ground and don't have a clear business model or some path to unit economics that makes sense, it can be really tough. So there's a tremendous amount of seed activity. It has not slowed down at all. But for the businesses that are working, there's a tremendous amount of demand. And that bifurcation happened, I think, 3 or 4 years ago, and it just continues. So I think the key is to raise enough off the bat to get to a point where you think you can really show some metrics that you can stand behind, and you're not desperate for capital when you actually have a business. There's kind of hopes and dreams financials when you put a put a plan in place, and then you actually have metrics that you're showing the next round. And I think that you want to really think through making sure the initial round, when you just have hopes and dreams financials, that you get enough capital in there to get far enough along.
I mean, I think if you're considering the process of going to raise money, you have to understand that when you talk to investors, they've seen a lot of companies. And so I think it's very important when you're ready to go fundraise that, one, you're different. You have a very clear, compelling story that separates you from what everybody else is trying to do. If you're just another AI for X, or whatever the current space that's in vogue is, people are going to have a hard time paying attention to you or taking you seriously. And then the other thing is to be really informed about the space that you're raising in, to the extent where when somebody's asking you questions, you know more than they do about it. And I think a lot of investors use that as an initial assessment of whether a founder is worth really paying attention to or not, is how deeply knowledgeable and passionate are they about this particular area that they're going after. Because they meet a lot of smart people all day long. And if you don't have a very clear, different story and are really knowledgeable about what you're pursuing and that whole universe of competitors and potential partners, it's going to be harder for them to spend real time taking you seriously.
Yeah, so I guess the only thing I would add is that there's so much money in the market. The Vision Fund is out there, shoveling hundreds of millions of dollars into some companies that, I don't see it, but I think Masa is smarter than me, so we'll hold out on that one. But no one's leaving the market, right? So you have these big sort of, Vision Fund or institutional investors or corporates coming into the market. They're not necessarily crowding anyone else out. There's just more money to be had. And so I think, while yes, there's massive amounts of money going to sort of the haves, the businesses that have scaled tremendously and are essentially public market offerings in the private market, there still are investors who are looking for doubles and triples and are looking for thoughtful entrepreneurs who understand their unit economics and are scaling their businesses in a way that's sustainable. And so, I think while there is concentration amongst the as Charles said, the haves or the companies that, as it gets bifurcated, are clear winners in investors' minds, there are a lot of other companies getting additional at-bats as well that aren't in that bucket.
Maybe one other point for the entrepreneurs out there, I think in the early stages when you're getting both positive and negative responses to your story, use that opportunity to just hone your story, because at that point it is just storytelling and the team. And at Adam's stage, he's often backing, we do seeds to investing too, you're really backing the people and the market they're going after. There's not much else to it. You're backing whether or not they can hire well, whether they convince people to not only give them money, but come join them and spend the next few years of their life working on that project. So that's what we're investing in at the very early stages. And for those, you just want to align yourself with the right type of people that you're going to work with and are on board with the same plan as you. So, coming back to when you're first raising capital, I think it's not taking no for an answer and just kind of shucking and jiving a little bit, because there's so much money out there. You can often find it. It might take a while.
Great, thanks. And being here in New York, how does any of this differ for the local community versus what we see in other geos? What makes the startup community here unique, and how would you say that your styles differ than maybe your colleagues in other geos? Who wants to take that?
The scene is definitely smaller and less momentum driven. Silicon Valley can be a little bit of an echo chamber, as people like to say, and I think that exists less here. I would like to say people are a little more rational as investors here, and also I think the community's great. Everyone is very supportive of each other. It's a small community of investors. It's also a much smaller community of startups. That's not insignificant in size, but small enough where a lot of people know each other, and it's not a zero-sum game. I think people really try to help each other out, and it feels like a very exciting place to be right now, particularly when West Coast feels a little insane.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I'll second that. So I just moved back to New York from San Francisco after a decade there in March. And I certainly sort of could see that without being here in terms of, you know, the rationality or the sobriety of just really any market outside of the Bay Area. But I have really seen and found that sort of community element here as well, which is really nice and really refreshing. I'll also say that as someone who focuses on consumer, the diversity of opinion and jobs and points of view and interest in the arts and brand and storytelling is so far beyond what we sort of see from interesting companies in the Valley, just in terms of the ability to build brands.
Just to understand who the audience is for sort of how we think about it, how many of you are founders, entrepreneurs? Do you want to raise your hand? Okay. Any other buckets I should ask about? That's yeah, that's the all right, so that gives us a sense, probably like 2/3 of you, 3/4.
And what would you all say to those startup founders that may think or lean towards trying to raise from people out on the West Coast? I think there's this big sense just in the overall tech community that everything is happening out there in the West Coast.
I was just going to say, so I think when you're raising capital, just come back to my earlier point, you want to turn over a lot of stones. You never know who the right partner is going to be, and it's a real personal relationship that an entrepreneur and an investor enter into. For better or worse, it's kind of a marriage you can't get out of. Once you're a shareholder, and there's no liquid market for that equity, so you're kind of in it with each other for a while, and you're on the same side. It can be somewhat adversarial at some points when businesses don't go well, but you want to spend a lot of time meeting various folks to see who you want to work with, and that's more important than where they are or what the name of their fund is. You want to understand some of the dynamics of whether or not that fund has enough capital to support you and the partnership dynamics and all that. But the individual is everything in my experience. So I would meet folks locally because you're going to want to spend a lot of time with them first. So where you are should matter, in my opinion. So I have partners in San Francisco, I have partners in Boston, I have partners in Israel and India. We focus on sectors, but typically we try and pass it to someone locally because it's going to be easier to have lunch every few weeks and to be there when something happens at the company, good or bad. So I think local money is better if you can find it, but you definitely want to explore other geographies if you're not getting the reaction and finding the people you want to work with.
My sense is that the group is probably more towards the early stage founder than the late stage, but I would say for Series B and C, you're getting on a plane and you're going west because you need a certain amount of shots on goal, as Charles was saying, and so there's aren't enough shots here in New York, and so you're flying out west. For early stage money, I'd be surprised if you have to fly out west. It's slightly sector specific and getting potentially the right domain expertise behind you. For really early stage money, I think part of the truth is like capital's capital. You need it to start your business, and you and the people that you hire that are thinking about what you're doing as your full-time team is really all that matters. And so you don't need to over-optimize, just raise capital and do really good work. I think people get really caught up in like optimizing their rounds and thinking about brand names of funds, and I think 99% of it is on how good you guys are.
Great. Moving right along, everyone talks about artificial intelligence, machine learning. It's everywhere we look. We talked about it earlier today. What other areas do you think are hot? Do you think that's overhyped? What are you all looking at and most excited about?
I've been spending a lot of time on voice recently, and sort of specifically how that parlays into retail in areas that I know quite well. I think that all of these things, voice, machine learning, AI, at a macro level, are sort of very nebulous and overhyped. But as you begin to think about the vertical applications of each of these things, and companies that become the expert in a specific space for each of these, I think it becomes much more interesting. I also think we're at a place right now where it's not necessarily real yet. So we're at a place where there's a lot of human assistance involved in these things. And as an investor, I don't think that that's a problem per se. I think so long as you're using humans in a way that they're getting more and more efficient every day to service the customer, then it's pretty exciting.
And as a firm, we tend to focus on areas that everybody else isn't, because we have the view that in spaces where you have many, many companies and investors and it's very competitive, it's extremely difficult to pick winners. And unless you are one of very few extremely well-known firms, you have to ask yourself the question, why is an entrepreneur going to come to me unless I have a pre-existing relationship or have spent a lot of time in a particular space? So we tend to like to focus on areas that are not hyped. So we're looking at, and I mean, these are personal interests, animal communications, tattoo removal technologies, fertility. These are areas that we're spending a lot of time in where we don't see a lot of other investors spending time. And that's what we like. We have touched on sectors that are, I would say, more in vogue, like crypto and artificial intelligence. And I think anytime there's a lot of momentum around a category, it's usually a signal that something important is happening. But you know, in the classic Gartner hype cycle, you have this initial wave of entry and then a lot of companies that die out. And it becomes very difficult to pick winners. So another really important thing is that if you're not one of the first investors in that space early on, it's probably too late. Because by the time you start writing those checks, there's just a lot of noise, and it's really hard to overcome that. So, you know, I think the goal is, and our view is, we want to be invested in sectors that aren't sexy yet. It's really important to be involved in types of companies that can grow into spaces that do become more attractive over time. But if you're trying to invest or start companies in the middle of, you know, a hype cycle around a certain area, it's probably too late, is my view.
I mean, when you talk about machine learning, AI, crypto, blockchain themes, all these things, they're not sectors in my mind, and they're underlying technologies, right? So 10 or 12 years ago, everyone was talking about SaaS as a potential sector. I still argue with my colleagues sometimes. It's not a sector. We have people who focus on SaaS investors, but it's the underlying technology for half of our portfolio now. And we were early on that theme. Some people are early on the ML/AI themes, but I focus on financial services and education and a few other areas and have sub-roadmaps within those. Right now I'm focused very much on rethinking the mortgage value chain and certain areas of insurance and how does blockchain change certain areas of Wall Street. So within those, the themes are applicable, and I look at some startups that are applying AI to insurance. I'm not sure they're relevant themes enough yet to build a company around them. Sometimes I think these things are not necessarily overhyped because those underlying technologies will probably power half our portfolio 10 years from now. But it's how to think about them as they apply to certain sectors, whether they're new ones that no one's focused on yet. I have colleagues who are focused on space and getting new things into orbit. I have some folks focused on a lot of these themes, but we all kind of collaborate and come together and say, what are you seeing in these underlying technologies, and then kind of present how they're going to impact various sectors.
So there are a bunch of themes we're following. I'll mention them, but more than anything, it's about an entrepreneur walking in, having a really interesting insight and a sense of why it's the right time to build it. And so, you know, for all of you guys in the audience, I'm sure you know what that is for you. I don't think ideas are sort of equal opportunity, and so me mentioning spaces is probably less informative as things you should work on. Perhaps maybe you say, oh, I'm working on that, so I should go talk to you. We love marketplaces. It feels like we're seeing a paucity of like interesting consumer service and sort of consumer marketplaces right now. I think local is really underexplored and underinvested. So much has been unlocked by the phones in our pockets, but fundamentally, I don't think that our local experiences have changed enough. The rise of the data scientist is a really important theme that we follow. The microbiome in the healthcare space, we follow a lot, and sort of the whole prescription value chain. Those are a couple.
Okay, and just going back to cryptocurrency and what you were mentioning, Charles, I mean, that's everywhere now, and there's really ICO Mania, if you will. What are your thoughts on this kind of new mode of investing and the companies that are coming up really in a completely different sphere from the venture world and just going with the ICO?
Yeah, it's fascinating, and obviously there's a lot being written about it. I think the only people who are authorities in the space are the ones that present the ideas as they don't know where this is going, because nobody does. And it's a really attractive new form of raising capital for certain types of businesses that have a distributed community. It should not apply to all types of businesses, but if you can get cheap capital and not give up a big piece of your company to folks like us, it makes a tremendous amount of sense. And we even have companies in our portfolio that are considering it as a vehicle for future capital where it might make sense. So we're tracking it closely. We've, as a fund, actually invested LP capital into a couple of funds that are getting exposure to some of the digital coins that we think are somewhat attractive, but they're, to use the word noise, I mean, there's probably no space with more of it right now. A lot of people are going to lose a lot of money, which is unfortunate, but again, I think the underlying themes behind all of this are here to stay. And I think a lot of venture firms are now thinking about how do you hold tokens directly. Custody is a huge issue. We actually think there's opportunities to back companies that are doing that well. How do you actually take custody on behalf of LPs of these tokens is quite complicated, and you have to put some real operational structure around that. You can't just willy-nilly write tokens on a piece of paper and put it in cold storage. So it's a fascinating area. There's a lot of businesses where it makes a tremendous amount of sense, and we think it's here to stay. But we don't think venture capital is going to be completely disrupted by it. We think it's going to be changed dramatically by it, just like many underlying technologies change venture capital.
A lot of people are going to lose a lot of money. I mean, there is just behavior out there right now that's insane if you try to look at it with any rational point of view, where people are raising tens of millions of dollars on nothing more than a white paper idea for a hypothetical project that has not yet come to bear. And the odds that 2% of those things are ever successful is extremely low. So, it's classic pump and dump behavior where you see people trying to do pre-sale at a discount to get investors with some credibility so then they can go market it and then raise more money from, speculators who are just buying coins and then selling them immediately. It is really, really bad behavior, and I think ultimately companies get the investors they deserve, and there will be some amazing ideas and businesses that come to life because of this phenomenon, but the vast majority of what's happening right now, I think, is about as close to fraud as you can get.
And I think it's important to differentiate between blockchain as an underlying technology and initial coin offerings. Initial coin offerings are a potential way to disrupt venture capital and Wall Street, but the blockchain theme and decentralized technologies and some things are really going to be changed by that. That's almost impossible to argue. But the ICO theme is something that I think we're all just very cautiously watching. A lot of people are going to make money. A lot of people are going to lose money. And the dust will settle at some point. And the government's going to have a lot to say about a lot of this.
So there's been a lot in the news lately about bad behavior on all kinds of senior people in all kinds of industries, but some may say it started with the VC story a few months ago. Are you seeing any changes since this has come out in terms of the type of founders that are coming and pitching you, in the way you conduct your business, general changes in your funds?
I guess I'll go first. I mean, it's been 2 months since this stuff came out, and as we've seen everything else come out in the entertainment industry, this #MeToo phenomenon on Facebook and Twitter over the past few days, this is systemic. And so, not to be a total downer, but to think that like if the NVCA writes an HR policy, that this is going to go away is I think naive. I do think though that there's a lot of fear in the industry right now, and I think that as they say, sunlight is the best disinfectant, and so there's gray area behavior that I think will be cleaned up pretty quickly because of the fear of exposure and the victims or whatever, the women in the industry that are coming forward have now sort of a platform and license to speak about things that are going on. So I don't think it's going to change overnight. I don't think it's fundamentally going to change until we have sort of equal representation in funding, equal representation at the partner level at a bunch of firms. But I do think that this sort of exposure and this conversation is, while extremely disappointing, moving us all in the right direction.
Yeah, and I mean, I think for those of us in the industry, it's sad. I mean, just to know that this is happening and to see people affected in these ways is brutal. The only way to fix it is with action. I think blog posts and policies, they're fine, but it's just actions are everything, and everyone's just going to have to lead with action. I think, we're talking about a lot of ideas internally about how to just facilitate more pitches from a diverse community, open office hours that are only catered to some groups, because a lot of it is a self-fulfilling prophecy of just our business is networks, and how do you get contact with us is by relationship. So the way to do that is to facilitate more open avenues into our firm. So we're definitely exploring some of those things. Other than that, I think it's just behavior and action. And as a director on many boards, I think it's just asking harder questions of the team as to how they're handling situations. And especially when a situation comes up, I think many boards have been not acting in the right way to hold their teams accountable. So I think as an investor, you can facilitate change as a director of these companies, and then also by hiring colleagues who are more diverse.
Sorry. I think we're going to open up to questions. I'm sure the audience here all has like a question they're dying to ask. So next 10 minutes is open floor. So who wants to kick it off? You are closest.
I saw your hand first.
Hi, I have a question about teams. You mentioned that they have to have passion for their industry and knowledge of their industry. What kind of checklist do you have in your minds? Is it skill-based? Is it experience-based? Have they had to be a serial entrepreneur? What do you look for?
Tenacity, that's one thing. You look for, some people call it founder market fit or founder product fit. Like asking the question, why is this person uniquely suited to solve this particular problem or go after this opportunity? Is it because of a particular skill set or experience they have, or a unique background that gives them a network or understanding of a space that others might not have? So it's trying to understand like why is this person going to do something that others have not been able to do before?
Maybe just to quickly come back to the diversity point, I think all those things 100% true. I'm starting to care more about the early stage teams. If there's a lack of diversity on the team, it's a bad sign, because if you're not thinking about those things, both diversity of thought, diversity of background, the founding team has to have that founder market fit. And then I think you want to start to see some kind of non-Silicon Valley mentality where there's a real diversity of both how long you've been around the industry. You want to see people from other industries come in, especially when we're trying to disrupt these things. So, for example, I'm invested in a company that's trying to go after the life insurance space. and rethink how consumers can engage with life insurance in a younger demographic. Sure, I want to see some people with insurance experience, but we're not going to change that industry if everybody has that experience. So diversity both of background, ideally race, gender, all those things are critical early on.
So given how much easier and less expensive it is to start and scale startups, how early is too early? And are you seeing your seed investments or smaller investments in early stage companies because of that, or is it still, what level of traction are you looking for before it makes sense to invest? And what is too early?
So I think that's a different answer for all of us, more specific to our funds. But I think for you guys, you're thinking about connecting the amount you raise to a series of milestones that you can hit so that you can make demonstrable progress and it makes sense along some sort of a narrative that you're building towards. Now, sometimes you sort of want to build backwards, and you can change the milestones based on how your business changes and what you think you'll actually hit. So this is pretty fluid, and you're sort of both seeing how far you can take the business and the story that you can tell, and you're changing them so that they work. But, let's say you've raised a seed round, and you need to think about what milestones do I have to hit to raise that Series A. People often work on an 18-month cycle, so you hope that you can put your head down and go to work for 12 months, and then you give yourself a 6-month buffer to raise that next round. That's sort of like the standard. So as you think about your narrative, you could sort of build in this 18-month time frame into it. The only other thing I'll introduce is I don't think it's a given that raising venture money is right for everyone in this room. It's a very specific asset class for a very specific type of company with certain with certain growth objectives that might not make sense for everyone in this room. There might be non-dilutive financing. There might be some sort of a debt financing that makes sense so that you own a lot more of your company, which makes a lot more sense. Or maybe you need initial equity capital to get off the ground, and maybe you never raise again because you're profitable. So I think thinking about how do we get to the Series A is a mistake. I would think about how you get to profitability.
Just want to underscore that point because we haven't really talked about that. A lot of people in this room probably shouldn't talk to any of the four of us. And I think that's a hard thing to think through because the kind of zeitgeist, as we talked about earlier, is startup nation, scale fast. Mark Zuckerberg, we all want to build large companies, but many problems don't call for that kind of strategy. And many businesses shouldn't bring folks like us that are trying to generate very, very high returns because we invest in a risky asset class. So when I invest in a startup, we invest out of a $1.6 billion fund. To move the needle on that, we need things to be quite large. So we only go after large opportunities. A lot of times I meet great entrepreneurs who just are going after something that's not a fit for us, but I wish I could join their team, and I think they're onto something fantastic and is going to generate a tremendous return for everyone around their table. So it's important to take the feedback from someone who you're talking to about potentially raising money and framing it in that way. And another point, Adam might seed something, and then after they take in that money, a good thing to do is to go talk to folks who do the next type of round and say, what will you be looking for my type of business in 18 months? And then you can hold them to that. And then they also will start to build a relationship with you and say, this is the kind of team that does what they say they're going to do. And those are the best relationships.
And just riffing off of that, I think we've seen, given the sort of pervasiveness of connectivity and flood of dollars into the market, we've seen venture investments in a lot of areas where we haven't traditionally seen venture dollars allocated. So a lot of sort of new consumer brands, a lot of offline retail and restaurant concepts and things like that. And in those areas in particular, there's something to be said for the slow growth and the building of brand. It's not something that you typically can put venture dollars against. So as a result, we've seen a lot of high-profile companies, Nasty Gal is a good example. ModCloth is a good example that were beloved by their customers, went the venture route, and then had this sort of gun to their head from their investor base saying, grow faster, grow faster. We need a 3 to 5x in 5 years. And it didn't work for them. And so I think it's just sort of a real life example of what we've all just been speaking to, which is this is not a one-size-fits-all product. And if you are one of those businesses, maybe there's a family office or someone with a bit of a longer investment horizon that will be a better fit. So knowing sort of what the right speed is for your business to grow, it doesn't mean that you don't want to be a massive business, but maybe you can't get there in 3 years, right? Maybe it takes 3 years of slow growth and brand building before you want to step on the gas.
We have a question right here.
Hello.
You go
Thank
be
you for your time. I would like to go back to that topic about local money. I'm from Brazil, and basically, first time I ever had a contact with a VC, the first thing he told me was like, you don't trust your Senate, you don't trust your president, how are you going to trust a company in Brazil? So I would like to hear this from you. Would you actually have money that would go away across countries, right? For something that maybe is not sexy, but it can be really worthwhile?
So we have a couple investments in Brazil, so I'll take that question. And I've spent some time there. It is a fascinating place, and I wouldn't probably invest there personally. Local money is going to be uniquely positioned to help you achieve your goals, but getting money from abroad obviously changes the trajectory of a business there because of the stability of other currencies. So there's a currency play, which complicates everything. So for us, when we learn about a good business there, Nubank, a company doing really well in Brazil, fintech company, I would probably be more cautious on the valuation I'd be willing to pay for that business just because of the existential political risk and exit risk. So I think outside investors are just going to be viewing it with some sort of discount. Not to say we wouldn't consider it, but you just kind of have to price in things that you don't know or you're not comfortable with. So I would say enter into those conversations, but with the grain of salt that people are going to be uncomfortable doing that. We have existing investments in Russia and Brazil and other markets where those questions are in play, and we just tend to be more cautious on what we're willing to pay as an entry point.
One of my partners, Renata, is Brazilian, so the first thing I'd ask you to do is talk to her. And you could chat in Portuguese, but the hurdle's just higher. Anytime you're looking at something that's outside of your core market, it's just a much higher hurdle. You have administrative issues that you have to deal with currency and taxes and foreign investment vehicles. You might be restricted from doing so based on your limited partners who don't want money going to certain countries. So it's just a harder thing for an investor to do, so the hurdle is that much higher. So it's not impossible, it's just a heck of a lot harder, and it's oftentimes easier to find local investors first, at least until you've been able to establish that you've got something really special on your hands.
It was very interesting topic opened up over here, you people discussed. That was area of AI and deep learning, machine learning, and you classified as touched and sexy area, and one of gentlemen said untouched, unpaid attention. You go the direction, you make money. And I recall that Ogi Berra said, if you know where you're going, you will not be lost. You gotta know your direction. So I would like to learn from you. Please, what do you mean by touched areas such as AI? And you defined as underlining technology. And I believe that this is a kind of new area. The technology is not touched yet. Artificial intelligence, you gotta be equipped with the all underlying platforms such as machine learning for on the top, AI setting, deep learning setting, all the algorithm you gotta learn. I would like direct us where we should go, whether we should pick up the technology Amazon brought or the technology Azure or Microsoft, point and click. It's not going to work. Should be innovative. The person is going to do business should be knowing some kind of programming technology in order to get something new. Thank you.
So I think Dustin was kind of alluding to this in his last talk. Betterment uses some of these technologies for their business, but they're not going to compete with Amazon or Microsoft or Google or even Facebook on these themes, right? So developing better AI and machine learning principles is not their core business. There are some startups out there that go down that path and try to develop a better mousetrap to fuel the entire ecosystem with better artificial intelligence. Perhaps you'll then use them and their API to fuel your next business. But I think what we were referring to earlier, and I think Courtney mentioned this, the sector-based approach is more relevant in many of our minds. How do you apply these themes to an actual problem? Because it's very hard to imagine a raw startup building better underlying technologies. So that was the theme I think we were touching on earlier. I don't know if anyone has a better way of explaining it.
I think we'll do one more short question. Who wants to kick it off? Is my mic on? Oh, it is. That's way better.
Hi, thanks for coming. What are the biggest challenges or problems that you as venture capitalists face every day when doing your job?
Yeah, I mean, it's partly communication overload. There's just so much coming at you all the time, not to mention all of your responsibilities to your existing companies, like in terms of responding to countless entrepreneurs who are walking your door or emailing you or reaching out or leaving you voicemails. And it's, we're in such a privileged position. We owe it to people who are trying to start companies to help give them good feedback. And that can be really overwhelming at times when you just have a lot going on. And so sort of taking the time to focus and getting away from just the scattershot sort of attention that is everywhere it can be a real challenge sometimes. And I think another thing that is really difficult is being different. It is hard to walk away from areas and ideas when there's a lot of momentum behind them and sort of recognize where your own strengths or weaknesses are. This is in many ways a business where you see a lot of people might be doing really well, doing something that you're not, and it can be very hard to stay disciplined in this business. And I think especially in times of ebullience like we're seeing right now, it can be especially challenging, and I think it's critically important to have that kind of discipline and patience and focus.
I couldn't agree more with both of the things you said. I think something that we and many, I think, investors try to do is a thematic approach and saying these are the 3 areas that we care about. The truth of the matter is your friends who have earlier stage companies call you about one of their businesses that's doing great, and like more than focusing on one specific sector, we focus on driving returns and investing in good businesses. And so the discipline and trying to be an expert in something and be patient about the things that you know are going to happen in that area where you do have an edge, you do have a knowledge edge, is really hard to do. But those that do it well it pays dividends in the long run.
I was just going to say saying no sucks. So you guys are all working so hard on your companies. A lot of us have worked at startups before. We know how hard it is. And I'll meet probably 700 or 800 companies this year and make 2 or 3 investments. That would be a busy year. So you just have to think about that when you're meeting folks like us, because we don't like saying no. There's just a time problem. That's probably the thing that's most exciting about the ICO development is those people aren't people. So they don't come up against the constraint of we can only sit on 10, 12, 14 boards at one time, and then you're in those things for 7 to 10 years to exit. So it's just important to keep that in mind, that we don't like saying no as much as it hurts to hear it.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Round of applause.